Okay, so as the title of the video might suggest, is that yes, for reasons that I was almost insanely curious about, I decided that what I was going to do is that I was actually going to buy an actual copy of Liz Truss's 10 Years to Save the West, just because the reviews for this book have been striking, to say the least, as these pop-ups will display right here. Also because, well, what I did is that I actually bought an Amazon copy from Kindle, which is the very first time I've actually bought something from Kindle before. Also, it was the only way I could actually procure a copy of this book without paying an extortionate amount to Liz Truss herself, since if the book was meant to retail at least £16 in the UK, which even for a new book, that's borderline extortionate for my tastes, buying it from Kindle was the only way. It literally cost only £10, so for 10 quid for a brand new book, for one that I was basically gonna read and basically rip apart, was, well, it wasn't too bad. So I feel like I can be somewhat excused for this. Also because if this level of extortion wasn't bad enough, there are some people who are actually trying to flog it on eBay for as much as £25. Somebody somewhere outside of Liz Truss must be making an incredibly good thing out of all this. But one person I imagine is not going to be making a good thing out of this is, well, Liz Truss herself by the time I've finished reading it. Because I genuinely want to put this into perspective, ladies and gentlemen, is that I decided I wanted to go even one step further and actually read the entire book as sort of like an audio book, just to make sure you guys have sort of like a hands-on sort of document of this. Because, to be completely honest, ladies and gentlemen, there are some very serious issues I do have with this book just by its introduction. And her introduction talks a lot about how she had her first meeting with Queen Elizabeth II and her very sudden passing almost immediately after Liz Truss's meeting with her. Then a lot of this goes into detail about the fact that Liz Truss was attended at a meeting at Buckingham Palace with other world leaders. And I can actually point to you, because I have have it open to me right now, is that her arguments sort of, and there are a lot of arguments that fall flat on their face from the beginning. Let's just straight up go into this, because she somehow tries to work this into the fact that the West has lost its way, and that people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan were the true standout authoritarian figures for democracy. Yeah, she tries to make the case that things in 1983 or 1984, or at some point during the 80s, during the reign of Thatcher and Reagan, are somehow better than they are today, and are better representatives for democracy than anything that the left, who are described as creeping and wanting to put their impacts and their identity politics into notion. I'll just grab from you a few extracts from this as soon as I can find them. Front of the Cold War, the situation with the Queen claim to the throne. Oh yeah, here's like a first one. At the Buckingham Palace reception, most of the G7 leaders were gathered in the first room. As I looked around, seeing leaders like US President Joe Biden, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and French President Emmanuel Macron, I asked myself several questions. Has the fact that the global left has been in charge emboldened our adversaries? Does the West have the leadership required to face down these challenges and prevail? And why am I the only conservative in the room? Then she goes on to say, this book is not a traditional political memoir. Oh, you're not wrong about that. I do not see it as simply a chance to tell the detailed inside story of my time in government and justify every decision I made while I was there. Her short stay there, we should say. There are huge problems in the world today and major challenges for those of us who believe in freedom at home and abroad. Yet our political discourse is often fundamentally unserious, obsessing over trivialities and more concerned with personalities than with ideas. Well, she says that, but what personality does Liz Truss think she's coming across by going over these things as a sort of petulant, whiny teenager saying that just because my time was short and people regard me as a failure doesn't actually make me a failure, because look over there. And that's the kind of the attitude I get from a lot of this book so far. You may have heard me use the phrase that the press and other politicians use, and that is, look over there, used by conservatives, Labour MPs, Lib Dems. A lot of people use this tactic of look over there. It means, why are you paying attention to the things that are going on and are being directed towards us? Why should we point the finger towards us when instead, look over there, look at what else is going on? That's a lot of the introduction to this book, unfortunately. It doesn't seem to point any of the foibles at Liz Truss's own feet and about the mistakes she made. She says that she might consider the idea of one day writing an entire book of herself about her own mistakes at Downing Street. Whether she actually ever does this will remain to be seen, so bear that in mind for what it's worth. But it's also the fact that Liz Truss is trying to convince people that, you know, her ways were right and we were simply just not prepared to take on board her radical ideas for what they were worth. Yet our political discourse is often fundamentally unserious, obsessing over trivialities and more concerned with personalities than with ideas. It is often the media that gets blamed for that. But the bigger problem is with many politicians who buy into that agenda and will willingly play the game. The result is a political establishment driven by short-term popularity, well, short-term is a good word to describe Liz Truss, drifting on the prevailing winds of fashionable commentary. The real deep-rooted issues in our society and our world are considered too intractable to be tackled. I got into politics because I believe in the battle of ideas and in pursuing the policies that will make things better. I have strong views about the bold changes required to ensure that freedom and democracy win. I don't really think it was in the interests of Labour or left-wing politics and policies to destroy freedom and democracy. I haven't really seen... I don't really understand why they think that, you know, under a Labour government, democracy and freedom was going to crumble or flee. That's the another big issue that I feel like Liz Truss makes the mistakes in, is that she goes so as far as to suggest that conservatives are the only ones who actually stand for freedom and democracy, when you couldn't be really any further from the truth. I am not one of those who think the job of politicians is to manage whatever census they find when they take office and go with the flow. I think it is the job of political leaders to lead. And what did Liz Truss lead us to? Questions. That means challenging the consensus and making very clear what you believe in and what you think is going wrong. It also means making genuinely tough decisions. Well, tough for who? That's another case to put in mind. Despite the ingrained hostility of others. You mean the people who are opposed to you, people who use very strong worded arguments and who are backed up by figures, by events, by the forecast of the rates of markets and how things are being impacted at home. There are a lot of things that I could go in. I could go into basically the whole introduction by myself just in this video alone, but that's the sort of problem that I feel like Liz Truss is trying to establish, is that her argument is that the Conservatives are fundamentally on the right, and she wants to go back to the days of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, and thinking that the left are wrong because they just are, and that their ideas and policies are going to crumble freedom and democracy. Not to mention the fact that she even says, and why am I the only conservative in the room? Well, because if that's the game that Liz Truss wants to play, is that it makes her look exactly as it is. It makes her look like the odd one out. It makes her look as though her policies and this government that she leads has run out of steam, looks incredibly out of fashion, completely out of date, has expired, has no real place left to go because their changes have changed this country, but not for the best. And all that Liz Truss can do to subsidise all the criticisms labelled against her, as well as the Conservative government, is to go on the offensive by saying, it's not our fault, look over there. That's the thing that's always struck me with Liz Truss, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that she's not particularly very good at taking any of the blame, taking any of the responsibility. She says she's going to possibly write a book about all her failings, but as we all know, saying and doing are two very separate things. And, well, short-term popularity is... That might possibly be Liz Truss's epitaph right there. Short-term popularity. She might have been seen as popular at one point, but, well, look at her now. Look at the scathing reviews for her book. Are you really trying to tell me the only reason she's popular at all right now is because people are talking about her for the infamy that her book has caused, and by the time I'm finished actually reading her book itself, it should also orchestrate, hopefully, to a larger audience who should not be giving money to Liz Truss. For example, because bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, despite her short tenure as Prime Minister, Liz Truss will still receive her pension as Prime Minister. So why exactly are we going to try and make a millionaire even richer? You tell me. And with that being said and done, well, by the time we get to the end of the book, probably my opinions will either stay the same, they'll slide more into she is completely off her trolley, to maybe she's right about some things, but if they don't work, then does that mean her ideas work at all? Then, you know what, it's one of those things. So bear that in mind. So I'll be looking forward to seeing all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.